Sounds great. Oh, that's really cool.
Where? And I'll let folks in. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As we wait for everyone to hop on and before we get started, please feel free to reflect on the questions there on the Do Now slide. We'll give you all about 5 minutes to reflect on those questions, let other folks join, and then we'll dive in about 5 after the half hour. Hi, welcome everyone. We're so glad you could join us. If you're just joining, please consider the questions on the Do Now. My colleague Elizabeth is dropping that Padlet link into the chat periodically, or you can scan the QR code there on your phone if you're tech savvy, where you can record your answers. And we'll get started in about 3 minutes now.
Seeing a lot of really thoughtful answers already. A lot of people are proud of the work that the team has been able to do to focus on students, take care of student needs, rising to the challenge of supporting students and staff through this year, and just all the operational work that teams have done to get back to normal. So a lot of really great highlights about getting student learning up and running in the classroom this year throughout the pandemic. There's a link in the chat to the Padlet. If you're just joining, you can answer the Do Now questions there. Seeing a lot of really thoughtful responses about what you're most proud of this year, and some of those things keeping us all up at night. Seeing a lot of common trends and a few things that we're going to be able to address for you today.
Okay, it is 4:35 or 3:35 Central Time. I'm located on the Eastern time zone. So we're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time, even though we will likely have some others joining here soon. As Elizabeth was reading off some of the responses to the Do Now, it's been quite the year. You all are thinking about how to finish the year strong and how to start the years ahead strong as well. So we're really excited to be with all of you today. And to get us started, I'm actually going to kick it over to Corey Epler with the Nebraska Department of Education to take us through some framing for today's conversation.
Great, thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone. Good to see you on a sunny afternoon here in Lincoln, Nebraska. Hopefully everyone is getting some snow melt. I know I saw a little bit of grass today, so it's kind of exciting to get past winter and into spring, but really thankful that you all have opted for joining us this afternoon, and really excited to kick off this level of supports over the next few weeks. I know that we've talked about this in several different places, but I did just want to really ground us back to Nebraska's framework for school renewal and acceleration. And you've heard our team talk about the importance of language in this time. And, you know, we read the national news and we've seen the articles in Nebraska papers relative to deficit-based language around what we think has happened in the school year. And we've been working really hard to try to frame it differently and, you know, really trying to ensure and acknowledge the hard work of our educators and our families and our communities and our schools this last year. And just to be real honest, we don't think learning is lost. We know that learning has and is occurring in our schools. We acknowledge there have been disruptions and students have been impacted, some more than others. But again, we really want to continue to pivot our framing and our language from learning loss to really thinking about unfinished teaching and learning. Moving from recovery to talk about renewal. Dr. Shirley Vargas talks about how recovery gets us back to once what was, and we know while we have a very strong school system in our state, we know that it might not, there's always an opportunity to continue to improve on that. And then this series, supported by TNTP, is really to help us think about how we move from remediation to acceleration. And we know that simply meeting students where they're at is not going to be enough as we come out of this pandemic and as we think about leveraging summer and moving into fall, and being really mindful of ensuring grade level instruction as we begin a new school year at the end of the summer. So I offer the framing of the context, some of the contextual pieces around the language, and our hope is that that's something that begins to resonate in our schools and our communities. The other piece I just wanted to highlight on the next slide is just really the 6 components that we've identified in our framework for school renewal and acceleration. And again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time in that, but just acknowledging as we think about this work and the supports that the NDE will begin to provide, really trying to focus in on these 6 components. I know that if you're a curriculum contact, I emailed you yesterday around the guidance around ESSER 2 funds, because we also think it's really important to consider how we can leverage this second round of federal funds to support teaching and learning. And we've worked to really provide examples that are aligned to the framework for school renewal and acceleration. So this is work that many of you have been doing and do every day. But again, we think it's a really critical time for us to consider how these 6 components support our work, again, through the remainder of this school year and into the next school year. And the last piece of our framework, and well, not the last, but this idea of four key actions. So as you're thinking about this language, this phrasing and these 6 components, what does this really mean? If we were to boil it down and say 4 core actions that districts should be considering right now, these are the 4 actions on the screen. So continuing to anchor core instruction to high quality instructional materials and content. That's nothing new in our state, and As an example, we're super excited about the level of interest in the Zern Math Summer Intensive Series as a strong example of HQIMs and content. Continuing to think about the data that we have available to us to really understand the impact that COVID-19 has had on individual students. And I think this PL series will really play an important role in helping districts identify ways that they can begin to diagnose and finish teaching and learning. We want to continue to think about and ensure that whole child needs are talked about simultaneously as academic needs. I often worry that conversations around SEL are held separately from conversations around academics, but we are trying to be mindful to ensure that when we talk about social emotional learning and when we talk about acceleration of academics, that we talk about them in tandem, because it's not an or, it's an and we recognize that need very importantly. And the last core action, we saw this a year ago as the pandemic hit and school buildings closed, how we can leverage community engagements and partnerships. And I know many of you are wrestling with how do we leverage and pull off intensive tutoring this summer, and how do we engage perhaps educator prep students or retired teachers in a way that will really ensure that kids are ready for this next school year. So we know that that's an important piece as well. So again, I also want to give just a shout out and thanks to the folks at TNTP. They've been absolute great partners for the Nebraska Department of Education. We continue to rely on them to help expand our own capacity at the agency. And this professional learning series, we've got 8 sessions and it's 20 hours of free professional learning that's really targeted over the next couple of weeks. We are archiving and recording the sessions. My hope is to get them on the Launch Nebraska website as quickly as we can turn them around. So don't feel like you have to set in every single one. If you've got teammates that you want to have participate, and then, when you're spending a Saturday morning with a cup of coffee, put on the Learning Acceleration series, and that'll certainly start your weekend off right. But again, thanks for your time. Thank you so much for your leadership. And as always, if the NDE can support the work you're doing, please let us know. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to our team from TNTP and let them get us started.
Thanks so much, Corey. My name is Elizabeth Lamont Mitchell. I'll be kicking us off from the TNTP team. We want to start by thanking you for all of the heroic work that teachers, leaders, systems leaders have been putting into school this year. And knowing you guys are back in the classroom every day, we appreciate the time you're taking out for this professional development. We also know that a lot of these challenges that we're facing during COVID, we need to be able to address. And we are hopeful that this 8-session PD will give you the tools and strategies you need so that you can accelerate the learning for students. I've added the Google Doc handout to the chat. You can click there and make a copy. And that handout will have all the information that you'll need throughout the session, other links that you might need to important documents. I'd love for the TNTP folks to be able to introduce themselves. We might be missing that slide. That's all right. So I'll throw it to Caitlin so she can introduce herself real quickly.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin McDermott, and I am coming to you from Dallas, Texas today. And this is my 17th year in education. I've been a teacher, obviously, an instructional coach, a principal manager, and I've also worked in a central office to leading professional development, and glad to be working with TNTP now too. Throw it over to Court. Yep, go ahead.
Great, thanks, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Henderson. I am based in Indianapolis, Indiana, but I lead engagements for TNTP all over the Midwest. I've been working with the team at the Nebraska Department of Education for the last 9 months or so, on a number of different initiatives, including their early childhood literacy initiatives and a recent series around the science of reading, where you might have seen myself or Caitlin as well, if you were a part of those. Super excited to be with all of you and talk about this concept of learning acceleration and Nebraska's renewal and acceleration framework in the weeks ahead. And I will turn it over to my colleague Shireen to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I am Shireen for Rudy, and I am also in Dallas, Texas. But I am working with Chris and Caitlin in a couple projects in Nebraska. And I'm just really excited to be a part of this work with you all today.
Awesome. And back to me, I'm Elizabeth Lamont Mitchell. I'm stationed in New Orleans, Louisiana. We are also back in schools here, and I have seen this acceleration work firsthand in our network. So I'm super excited to share it with you guys. Up next, just a few norms for our time together. We will be working online. We want you to be able to participate in ways that are comfortable for you. So unmute, join in, join the chat, and we also have some engaging poll questions and Padlet questions throughout. And then prioritize this learning experience. I really value being able to see your faces. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Tessa. We can see you guys with your cameras on. So when possible, have your camera on and be engaged in the session. And try to avoid those distracting social media, email needs that we all have. And when you're not talking, just stay on mute. That'll limit our background noise. And really make sure you're ready for the professional development. So take a minute to make sure you have everything you need. You have the handout open, and we can keep going. We have a few main goals today. This is, again, the first of 8 sessions. So today, our focus is really defining acceleration and what this acceleration approach will look like, and beginning the process of creating a system for your organization, for your district, to really push accelerated learning forward. We will later on in the series be talking more specifically about diagnostic assessments, about scope and sequences, about the nitty-gritty components of this larger process that we'll roll out today. Take a second to read these objectives. And I'll throw it back to Chris.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. So before we get into our topic today, just a little bit on what Elizabeth just shared, and as we move into some of these essential questions for today. We are fortunate enough to have a really robust, diverse group of educators with us on today's session, from teachers to superintendents, curriculum specialists, regional service centers, institutes of higher learning, and everything in between that you can imagine. And I say that, and we have folks from large districts, small districts. We're all entering this work from a different point and through a different lens, from a different role, and that's okay. What we are going to try and provide for you all today is a framework that will be applicable whether you are sitting at central office or whether you are in a classroom. We encourage you, if there's a slide or something we talk about that isn't as directly impactful for you in your role, that you think about how it can be applicable in your role. If you are a superintendent or curriculum specialist, think about how you are going to engage others within your district around this work. If you're a teacher or if you're a school leader and you see something that you think your district should be doing, think about how you can elevate this information with the right questions up to the leaders in your district to try and get the type of support for all students that you can. Likewise, throughout this series, we will try and touch on not just Tier 1 instruction, but for special education, for ELL, You know, how should we be supporting all students and thinking about that as educators? And as Corey mentioned at the beginning, a lot of what we will talk about, some of you are already doing. Some of you are already planning for this work as districts in terms of renewal and acceleration. Some of you have already adopted high quality curricular materials. Some of you who are excellent educators are doing learning acceleration and shying away from remediation already in your classrooms. But we're not doing it all the time, and we're probably not doing it for all students. And so how can we take an intentional approach to accelerating and renewing learning for all students? So that's really what we're going to focus on throughout this series. Just a little bit of data and background on why we think this is an important topic, why the department is leaning into it. It's been a difficult year for all of us. And when it comes to academics and thinking about the impact of COVID-19 and time in schools this year, NWEA did a study early on in the pandemic and took a look at what is the potential for missed learning and unfinished learning due to COVID-19. And they estimated that up to about 50% of learning in math would potentially be lost or not take place due to COVID-19. And in ELA, that was similar, up to 30% learning. At TNTP and as educators, we also know that you know, these slides take a look at all students and overall learning, but we also know from our research with the opportunity myth, and you all know from your experience as practitioners, that not all students are even getting this level of instruction. We know that there are gaps in instruction before the pandemic in terms of gaps between all students and students of color, students from low socioeconomic backgrounds, students with learning disabilities, and English language learners. And we know that through COVID-19, those gaps have only increased. And so not only do we need to renew and accelerate learning for some students, but for all students. And if you had a chance to reference Nebraska's renewal and acceleration framework, that's what that renewal piece is all about. It's about renewing as educators our commitment to not just some students, but to all students, and taking this opportunity as we look ahead the next couple of years to providing high quality instruction, high expectations for all students. So a note about, you know, why we're talking about this today and why we think it's important. You all know as educators, we've tried to address unfinished learning in a few different ways historically. You know, at the end of the year, you know, we typically retain students. We either do a social promotion so that students can continue with their peers despite outcomes, or we get stuck in remediation. And we know that this year, especially and into next year, it might get really easy to not even realize that we're getting stuck in remediation, because we know that there's so much unfinished learning. It could be really easy for us as educators to not realize that we're staying stuck in that unfinished learning and not actually getting to that grade level work that all students require. You know, there's an example that TNTP likes to point to, which is New Orleans, and I think New Orleans and Louisiana have been often heralded as an example of how you can take a broken system and a tragedy like Hurricane Katrina and get increased outcomes for students after the fact. But however, in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, what actually happened in a lot of schools there was that they got stuck in skill recovery. They got stuck in remediation. And after, you know, a period of time when it was time to test students, they actually found that students scored poorly on those state accountability tests because they were focused on remediation and recovery instead of on acceleration. So much so that was poor enough to threaten some schools' existence. So I'm gonna just let that sink in, and then also turn it over to Elizabeth, who has some experience with New Orleans education, to add a little bit of color to the slide as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I think as a school leader in New Orleans during this time, it was it was really well-meaning work that people were doing around skill recovery. So wanting to catch kids up from the learning loss or the unfinished learning they had after Katrina was well-meaning in terms of getting them the remediation, those supports. But the outcome that was seen was just continued decline. And so really providing more spiraling and just-in-time supports has been able to move the needle in New Orleans and get students caught up with their grade level peers nationally.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So why are we renewing and accelerating rather than remediating? We touched on that just a little bit here, but let's take a look at it a little bit further. So if you're familiar with TNTP, you might be familiar with a report that we put out in 2018 called The Opportunity Myth. And essentially, we started with the premise of why are so many students being told that they are A and B students and that they're prepared for college and career. And then they get to college or they get to career and they realize that they're not prepared at all. And so we wanted to understand why that was happening and what could be done about it. And so we went directly to students and we asked students about their experiences in schools. What we found out was students have big dreams, they have big aspirations. They're doing what they're told in school. They're earning A's and B's and we're telling them that they're successful. But indeed, the work that we're putting in front of them is not the work that they need in order to prepare them for their dreams and aspirations. So over the course of several years, we took a look at thousands of classroom lessons. We took a look at tens of thousands of assignments from classrooms. We analyzed thousands of student surveys, and we found that access to what we call 4 key resources, high engagement, high expectations, rigorous instruction, and grade appropriate assignments were what all students needed in order to achieve and at high levels. And as I talked about earlier, we also found that students of color, students with special needs, students from low socioeconomic backgrounds are getting access to these 4 key resources at a different rate than their white or affluent peers. So here's a couple of examples just to illustrate this. So this is one assignment in an 8th grade class, and this is actually a good assignment that we took a look at. This is an assignment that is meeting the needs and aspirations of all students. So in this classroom, students were asked to read A Mighty Long Way. It is a text that is appropriately complex, and it was a text that came from a school that was using expeditionary learning. So in terms of having access to a high quality curriculum and high quality materials, this was a school that had made that decision. So students were asked to read A Mighty Long Way. The text is appropriately complex and at the appropriate reading level for 8th grade. And then they were asked to write an informational essay on the effects the media had on the outcomes in Arkansas related to A Mighty Long Way. And so this is a teacher who is providing his or her students with the rigor of materials that they should be getting. In the same exact district, and oftentimes we would see this even within the same exact school, other students were having vastly different experiences. So in this classroom, say 8th grade, same group of students within this district, these students were given a 5th grade level text to read. And then they were asked to do a multiple choice vocabulary question, fill in the missing vowels in the words. So we see this disparity across a district, and we name this the opportunity gap, right? Students who are in one class or have a certain perception or certain access to certain resources within a district are being provided vastly different educational resources and expectations than their peers, even within the same school or the same district. So, obviously this is relevant to our topic today and moving forward. I think when there's unfinished learning, it would be really easy to, even unintentionally as educators, sometimes default to an easier text like the one that's up on the slide that is not grade appropriate, that is not complex enough for what we expect of students. And I think, the important thing to point to is that within the opportunity myth, what we actually saw was no matter where students started, when we provided them with grade appropriate assignments with high expectations, students are capable of raising to the level of expectations that we have of them. But oftentimes we don't even give them the chance to demonstrate that they can rise to that level. And so this slide, I think, is going to be critical in the weeks and months ahead as you're planning for renewal and acceleration within your schools, within your districts, to not get stuck in there's so much unfinished learning that we have to stay stuck in remediation. Rather, really make sure that you're advocating for all students in a way that makes sure that they have access to high expectations and high quality materials, because we know when we do put that work in front of students that they are able to raise to that level. And this slide also shows that no matter what student group a student is in, they all can achieve at similar levels. But too often than not, students of color, students with special learning needs, special students from low socioeconomic backgrounds are not even given the chance to try. So that's why it's so important to be intentionally focused in your renewal and acceleration plans and making sure that this is not just for some students, but it's for all students. And again, just the emphasis on renewal from the department's framework. And last but not least, we found that not only can all students rise to the level that we set for them, but that students who are behind when given grade appropriate assignments, the rate of growth is faster. And so when we give all students grade appropriate work, when we have high expectations for them, when we intentionally think about the supports that each student needs to get to grade appropriate level work, which Elizabeth and Shireen will talk about here in a minute, not only do all students benefit, but we start to close that gap, that opportunity gap between different student groups. And so by accelerating learning, by putting high expectations and critically important complex materials in front of all students, we can start to close those opportunity gaps. And so we know that these gaps existed before the pandemic. We know that the pandemic, even in school learning, has exacerbated these gaps. And so coming back to school in the fall, and then thinking about your learning the rest of the school year in your school and in your district, really think about what can you do now to start to close these gaps and reimagine learning for students. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shireen to walk us through this example here.
Yeah, so if everybody can open up, if you haven't already, the handout that Elizabeth linked in the chat. I'm going to put 5 minutes on the timer, and I'm very excited to hear what you guys have to think about this particular excerpt, where it sort of highlights the next steps from if you take the opportunity myth and you add the pandemic and the need to plan, what should we do and why are we accelerating rather than remediating? So I'm going to set 5 minutes on the timer. We have about a minute and a half left. And as you're wrapping up, if you would like to share some of the things that jumped out at you in terms of the difference between accelerating and remediating, you're welcome to either raise your hand. Sorry, that's my actual timer. You're welcome to raise your hand to have the floor, or if you'd like to populate in the chat some of your takeaways from this reading. I'm especially curious about folks in Nebraska and the surfing analogy. Don't be shy. Christy, I saw you chuckle at my joke.
Yeah, I had no idea what they were talking about. I thought we were building a road or something, but
yes, that's what I thought too. Sarah, you came off mute.
Are you implying we don't surf in Nebraska?
I am not here to judge. I'm in Texas. I don't surf. Sarah, did you want to share? Because you came off mute, so I'm wondering if you had something to share.
I didn't mean to come off mute, but I will share.
Yeah, that'd be great.
You know, I think for me, it was the difference, the impact on a child's identity and the self-fulfilling prophecy of regardless of missing skills that are captured, you can't really account for how a child feels about school and that impact on their identity.
Mm-hmm. Yes, as I think of my brother, who's my older brother, who didn't learn his times tables when he was supposed to. And, you know, the teacher told my mom, maybe he should stay back the year because he didn't learn the times tables. And I think back to that as a moment that shifted his identity as a student. I'm seeing some things come up in the chat. Yes, the reverse movement. The idea between the two, which we'll see on I think it's the next slide or maybe the one right after, is that one gets stuck in the past, right? And the other is focused on present and going forward. And the emphasis being on those things that we need to learn just in time to pick up the next thing. And I think that there is, you know, my experience is largely high school. So if you're like me, you're thinking of, we need kids to get credits, we need them to, you know, get to the next thing, to graduate on time. And this is not that. This is focusing on the actual curriculum that's in place to help make sure that kids don't just get stuck in neutral. I like the use of the term jumpstart. It seems like the most appropriate analogy there. I'd love to hear from one, maybe two more people on the difference between accelerating and remediating. Don't make me cold call. Yeah.
I can share.
Thank you.
Well, I put something in the chat also, but I was just thinking the language that was in this was really helpful. And I think it would be great for teachers because they need to have some kind of an experience where they really buy into this. thinking, because it's not natural. They want to meet students where they are and help them where they are. And I think that's just been a result of differentiation and the focus on that. And so I think this article will be really helpful for teachers, but I like the language that they used about how remediation is focusing on learning from the past, and we need to make sure we're giving them what they need currently.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'll chime on to that. I think the remediation really just falls in that deficit mindset thinking as opposed to the asset mindset.
Yeah, especially when you think about when we were reading it, if you thought cement mixer, you drew your own conclusions from your own experiences and what you have learned. And these shifts in reading around making sure that the texts are complex, making sure that they, address a wide variety of nonfiction things. Did you need to know all about surfing? No, but if you knew that it was tied and knew some of those key vocabulary words just before you read it, your understanding would have been totally different. So I do think that there's a lot of power in that, that piece. So if Chris, if you're able to go to, we talked about this, how would you define the two? So again, the idea, it's partly about timing, right? That it focuses on these skills that were built into this particular window of time for students. And it's focused more on what they should have learned then instead of what we need to learn and can learn now. In accelerating, the focus remains on the grade level content. We're not afraid of grade level content. We're not afraid of complex text. We know that kids can do it if they get the really concrete support in the interim. So with that, I will kick it back over to Elizabeth.
Thanks, Shireen, and everyone for sharing. So now that we have a working definition here of accelerating students' learning, and we're thinking about how do we continue with the most essential content, knowledge, skills that students need at each grade level? How do we give them access to those grade level materials while also providing just-in-time supports to fill those gaps or that unfinished learning that may exist? That's what we're going to focus on the rest of the time. We're going to dig into thinking through the planning that you'll need to do in order to accelerate student learning in the fall, and introducing you to sort of a high level process that we'll be walking through the rest of the session. We propose that you start by grounding your decision-making in a set of values that put students' learning and experiences at the center. We know students in schools face academic challenges and unfinished learning, so we want to ensure that we're grounding our academic planning in values that will support us in addressing those challenges. So we have 4 values here that we're really focused on. There may be more you want to edit, ways you want to include more information here. I want you to take 2 minutes in your handout and just read the guiding principles, read these core values, and annotate your reactions to them on your own computer screen on your handout. All right, now that you've been able to think about these, you have a question that should pop up for you. which guiding principle speaks to your work right now? Which one of these principles is really speaking to you? You can submit your answer, thinking through these polls, which one is most relevant to the work we're doing this year? All right, just added the handout link again if you folks asked for it. And Chris, tell us the results of the poll. Can you show us the results or tell us which of these core values is really sort of standing out to folks as our focus?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not quite sure that I'm tech savvy enough to figure out how to share it, but I can tell you that about 56% of the group is really focused around grade level content as an academic priority right now, which is great. I think that is in line with Nebraska's renewal and acceleration framework and really emphasis on high quality materials. About 20% are saying that they are focused on addressing inequities head on, which is fantastic. And about another 20% focus around supporting and assuming the best of all stakeholders. So high expectations, not just for students, but for all stakeholders. About 4% are focused on communicating clearly. But again, these results aren't indicative of which one is more important than the other. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are all approaching this work from different places and different priorities in our own district, schools, and communities. So no right or wrong answer, but that is the breakdown, Elizabeth.
Great. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for participating in our poll. Oh, now you're sharing the results, Chris. So now we can all see those results there. So thanks so much. Okay, so once we've sort of parked ourselves in these priorities, we're going to look at the next step, which is how we create a plan to accelerate student learning. We've listed 8 steps you'll want to take in order to create this plan, including sort of pulling together an acceleration team who will have time carved out to plan for the upcoming school year. Also having an advisory committee who can offer this team a sort of student, teacher, leader, family perspective to ensure that you're making the most of the data you already have to put together this plan to accelerate student learning. So take a minute to read these 8 steps. Think about the steps you and your team have already started. Where are you on this process? What steps have you already started? And if you're new to it, where are you going to be starting? Where are you going to be entering into this work today? Like Chris said, everyone is entering into this work at a different level. On the next slide, we have sort of a model of what this might look like for your team. You might be 3 months out, and this gives you a sort of a way to think about this work over time. So on your acceleration team, you're going to want to make sure that you have key folks and key stakeholders to make decisions about your academic strategy, to update your curriculum resources, and to design trainings for your teachers and leaders. Your teaching and learning director, your curriculum directors are going to be on this team. If you are an ESU, you might be thinking about how you can support the districts that you support throughout this process. On this team, you're going to want to make sure that you have members of different committees. So your special education team, your English language learner team, You want to have someone from assessment and research who can be responsible for ensuring that you're able to share data with teachers, school leaders, and district leaders rapidly after you take those diagnostic assessments. And you'll want representatives from your professional development team and principal managers who can help lead planning and training with school leaders to effectively support teachers. Take a minute to jot down which members of your system community might be on this acceleration planning team moving forward. Who would you include on your team? And based on your level in the organization, where would you fall? You'll want to anchor this team to sort of a high-level planning timeline, like the one you see on the slide, where that team gets set up now and has clear goals that they're working on. They can be determining the essential content for each grade level and subject area before using that information to update your teacher resources and train your teachers. We're going to talk about which content is essential in just a moment, but before we go there, we want to talk about what your acceleration planning team needs to know to do their jobs well. In order for the acceleration team to do their jobs well, they want to get information from all stakeholders. You will want to engage your students and families around the experiences they've had this year throughout the pandemic. Do families understand your vision for learning? Do families see the growth and progress that you are hoping for? And how did they feel the pandemic response went? Start with the information that you have and collect for information you don't have using focus groups moving forward. So you've put your learning acceleration team together. Some of you have already done that work. Some of you, that's work we'll do today in our group work time. And you've engaged stakeholders and have a clear understanding of their experiences in the pandemic. Now you're ready to concretely think through how we accelerate student learning for the next year. To accelerate students' progress, system leaders and educators need to identify exactly what unfinished learning needs to be addressed, when, and how. We recommend identifying the content, knowledges, and skills that students might struggle with in their current grade level and fill those potential gaps just in time when the material occurs in the school year. To do the work of accelerating student learning, you're going to want to select the most essential, critical, prerequisite knowledge and skills for each grade level and plan how you'll understand what students haven't finished in terms of learning yet and adapt teacher-facing materials and resources to account for that prerequisite material. The great thing about Nebraska is that a lot of this has been done in the essential content documents that we've linked in our handout. The essential content documents that Nebraska Department of Education has put out have a great pathway for you in terms of identifying that content knowledge that is essential to the grade level and which standards can support along the way. So in Nebraska, you guys are ahead of the game here in terms of identifying that essential content knowledge. And we will be working with you to continue that process so that you can accelerate learning throughout the year. To focus on the most critical prerequisite skills and content knowledge, you'll need to deeply understand the demands of the grade level standards. We have a few examples to show you on the next slide. In English language arts, this looks like deeply understanding the appropriately rigorous and culturally relevant texts that your students will be reading across the grade level. For example, here's a 4th grade example. A teacher might look across the year and notice that students are going to be reading Esperanza Rising in the fall. And that teacher may have the inclination to give students an easier text, to remove this book from the year-long scope and sequence out of fear that maybe students are too far behind to tackle such a complex text at the beginning of the year. And that would be sort of that deficit thinking that old way of thinking about remediation. Let me start with a third grade book at the beginning of fourth grade so that I can get students caught up on those third grade skills. Instead of that, instead of removing this text and opting for something of lesser value, our plan around acceleration, the model we want to use, is by tackling this text by using scaffolds and building students' content knowledge about the topics and the time period covered. So we know in Esperanza Rising, Ryan uses metaphors to convey complex themes, and students will need knowledge of both Mexican history and California and Mexico in the 1930s. So in order to address this, we would be scaffolding in just in time those content pieces and those prerequisite skills around metaphors students may need. In literacy, there is one caveat to this accelerate, don't remediate guidance that we're giving. And that's related to students' proficiency in those foundational reading skills. If a fourth grade student is struggling to decode or fluently read Esperanza Rising, they would need both the access to the grade level content and supports and direct instruction in the reading foundational skills that they're lacking. So we would support students to become a fluent reader and to learn to read so that they can access Esperanza Rising, while also continuing to give them the comprehension skills and the content knowledge that they need in fourth grade. We don't want to remove them from that ELA class and have them miss out on those experiences. Similarly, in math, the natural inclination here might be to make room for reteaching last year's standards. So if you're a first grade teacher, you might be trying to make room to redo kindergarten standards to make sure your students are really caught up. You want to spend the first 4 weeks of school just reviewing those kindergarten skills. That approach has been proven to actually cause inequities in our schools. So what we want to do is to make sure that we are using this year to focus on the essential content of first grade. So you'll notice there's lots of standards, and Nebraska has identified for you which ones are essential. Telling time in first grade is not an essential piece of content. It's an additional standard that we're going to cut out so that we can focus on the most essential content of the grade level. In this case, that's solving real world problems involving addition and subtraction within 20. Because that's essential content in first grade, we're going to give it extra attention. But we know that students have unfinished learning from kindergarten. And so we're going to look back to kindergarten, where the standard is solve real world problems that involve addition and subtraction within 10. And we're going to use that standard to provide those just-in-time supports in the first grade unit. So we won't be doing a separate kindergarten unit, but we will be looking to kindergarten standards to provide supports during our first grade unit. The work of identifying prerequisite skills and essential content has been started by Nebraska in the essential content standards. You all, I'm sure, are familiar with this document and this page. It is the best, I think the best in the country. So you should be looking at it often and watching everything that's posted up there. But this work exists. And so what you can do is start here when you're talking about accelerating in your school districts. It's detailed and specific, and it gives us the essential content and skills to focus on for the majority of our time. And these really work hand in hand with high quality instructional materials. So if you are using a high quality instructional program like Zern or another program, you'll find that there's clear overlap between the essential content that Nebraska has put together and the scope and sequences and the year-long pacing maps of those high quality instructional materials. So you've sort of identified that essential content. You now need to know sort of like, where are the gaps, right? What is the unfinished learning that is essential for me to cover this year? And this is where diagnosing unfinished learning comes in. It might be sort of tempting to try to diagnose everything that students might be struggling with, to give a lot of assessments, a whole battery of assessments, or a long assessment. That's not going to be a good use of your time or students' time. So when you're diagnosing unfinished learning, we want to focus on just that essential set of skills or content knowledge that we really want to target. We've listed sort of 4 steps that you can take as you plan to diagnose your students' unfinished learning. And our next session in the series will focus on diagnosing unfinished learning. So join us next week on Monday, where we'll dive into this in more detail. But if you are using a high quality curriculum, often there'll be diagnostics built in that we can focus on. And then we'll use that to determine which essential content and knowledge might need to be assessed. And then we don't want to spend more than a few hours here so that students aren't getting burned out by all the diagnostic testing. And then making sure that that data is used effectively. Once you've identified those essential contents and you've diagnosed where the unfinished learning is, you'll be able to use that information to plan your pacing guides, to plan your year-long scope and sequence. So rather than addressing this unfinished learning all at the beginning of the year, we'll be looking at those pacing guides for places where you can add in those supports and the scaffolds that students will need with the grade level before standards or other prerequisite skills that they may need. And so in this session, we will dive into building a calendar that meets the demands of each grade level and includes all that knowledge and skills that they might need. This might mean adding days to cover 3rd grade fractions if you're a math teacher, teaching more advanced content. It might mean adding nonfiction texts that will support students' reading preparation for A Raisin in the Sun. We don't want to cut those grade level standards or the grade level curriculum. We want to provide those supports just in time so students can access it. And finally, you'll want to make sure that you've set the expectations that teachers are using these resources rather than building their own curriculum. So you can ensure that every student in your district is experiencing grade level content. And this will come through training teachers and leaders on providing these acceleration supports. And one benefit of using high quality instructional materials is that these things are done for you, that you have access to scopes and sequences already created, and it becomes more about diagnosing your students' unfinished learning and addressing the specific needs of your students. To do this, you'll want to leverage the professional learning time that you have preparing teachers for the return of school. And of course, the acceleration plan will not be the only thing teachers need support around. You'll likely provide support around social and emotional learning and public health trainings, other things that teachers will need. In addition to all of that, though, you'll want to ensure that you have a solid plan to support teachers and leaders to accelerate rather than remediate student learning, knowing that this is an approach that might be brand new to folks. After you've planned the training content, you want to train your facilitators and verify that they're ready to execute the training well. Then you'll want to actually execute the training and see that teachers are getting those skills from their coaches and school leaders. Throughout the school year, we'll sort of monitor students and their mastery here and have a detailed approach. So this might feel like last year or a normal school year, right? You're going to plan your training content, you're going to train your facilitators, and then those facilitators will train your teachers and leaders. This model is the same. So we're set up for success here. All right, thanks, Chris. And throughout the school year, you should monitor whether your students are mastering that grade level content and whether your teachers and leaders are executing your strategy. We have detailed how you might want to monitor students' access through the opportunity myths for resources. Here you have a way that you can look at students' experiences through this sort of student assessment. And so this can give you an in-depth knowledge of where your students are at, and you can adjust supports for teachers and leaders based on student results. So being able to dive into that data. I know we're a few minutes over, Chris, so I want to make sure we get to our break. We have a 5-minute stretch break coming up. Shireen, before the break, do you want to make an announcement about our group time after break?
Yeah, so I have 8 groups, breakout rooms set up, and they're based on the registrations. But if there is a breakout group that you would like to be a part of that is not one of the ones that is listed, if you could private message me what group you want me to create, then I can add another room. I think that's it for me.
All right, turn it over to you, Chris.
Yeah, real quick before we go to break. So thanks, Elizabeth. One thing I wanted to point out, we mentioned districts and schools are all at different points. We know that some schools, you are ready to start renewing or accelerating learning now, or you have been doing it or working on it last couple of months. And so although, to do this for an entire year, the steps that Elizabeth went through can take a lot of time to plan. Also encourage you, especially if your district or school is already thinking of this or you are positioned to do it well now, to not wait on these steps. As you all know, there are tools to diagnose where students are at all the time in the form of formative assessments. And so if you or your district or your school is ready to do this now and start to shift practice, if you're a teacher and you're ready to start shifting practice in your classroom, it might be new, but don't wait now, knowing that students need learning, renewal, and acceleration the rest of this school year, as well as well into next school year and the year beyond that. So just wanted to give a plug for this school year as well. Elizabeth, thanks.
Great, thanks, Chris. So we will take a 5-minute stretch break. And then when we get back, we're gonna dive into some group work, like Shireen said. So be ready to be thinking about how you can make this applicable for you in your context. So we'll come back at 4:45. Take a quick break. All right, about another minute to run to the bathroom, grab that water, and then we'll start back up in about 60 seconds. We'll start all together and then we'll go into our breakout rooms. All right, let's come back together. Turn those cameras back on. Close out the email that you're sending, I'm sure. All the work that we're doing. And we'll get started. Great. We want you to have access to those breakout rooms. We'll open them again during the work time. We're going to come together here to talk about sort of our roles and responsibilities as individuals on the acceleration planning team. And again, we have about 20 to 30 minutes of work time coming up that we want to be really engaging and effective for you. So we're going to go through a model that's worked for me that I love when I'm thinking about planning a big project like this. And if you have other members of your team on this Zoom training, you'll be able to work collectively with them. And if you're alone, that's great too. You can be thinking about how you're going to take this back to your team, how you're going to roll this out, and how this can add value to the work that you're already doing if you already have a team in place. So we'll be using a model called the RACI model, RACI, to break down our roles and responsibilities. So you can go to the next slide, Chris. This model outlines who is responsible. So who is the person that is doing the actual work outlined by the task? Who's accountable? The person who is accountable for the task being done well, typically the supervisor, manager, director of the project. Who needs to be consulted? The people who are weighing in, giving support to the person responsible. And then who's going to be informed? Who are the people in your system who might need to be informed of how things are going? So in this model, generally there should be one person responsible and one person accountable. There could be two people working on a project together. You could be splitting grades like, oh, you're responsible for early elementary literacy. You're responsible for 6-12 literacy. So there could be ways that you're dividing it up, but generally that responsible should be one person, accountable should be one person, and then there'll be groups of people that need to be consulted and informed. So we're going to try another poll and then we'll do a discussion to hear some of your guys' voices. So in this next poll, I want you to reflect back on another big project or initiative. Which component, responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, has been a challenge for your team or has been missing from your work? So thinking back to another big project, which one of these areas might be an area that you really want to focus on? Where have the hurdles been in the past for you? Do a little reflection. All right, Chris, go ahead and close that poll. See if it pops up for us again when you close it. Or, oh, there we go. Oh my goodness, look at these results. Okay, someone who picked informed. Tell me a little bit about your thinking here.
Yeah, I picked informed. People who are responsible and accountable generally know who they are because they report to the superintendent or a principal or something like that. So, and often in a larger school district, which I think several of us are that are on here, we reach out to some people to help offer support or get that consultation piece. In a larger district like ours, there are sometimes where we just forget people that we should tell about components of the plan. The people who get trained all hear about it, but there's people that just need information about it that we skip.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That doesn't just happen in big districts. Just so you know. We sometimes forget to tell everybody. And even maybe forget to tell them the what, but certainly we're always not clear enough on the why or how the decisions were made.
And what would the impact of that be if we're not informing people of the what and the why around accelerated learning and this model of acceleration as opposed to remediation?
Sometimes you just have disconnects and gaps in understanding or lack of buy-in.
Christy and Andy, you guys are like mind meld right now. Same answer in the chat and verbally. Okay, great. So in this next portion of time, I want us to be, you guys will probably get done really quickly, the responsible and accountable. Like you said, in a school system, responsibility and accountability, those are ingrained into us. It's part of our DNA in schools and in school systems. And the pieces to focus on are who do you need to consult, and then how and who are you going to inform, and what should that look like throughout this process, whether you're accelerating learning this year, rolling this out, or if you're preparing for next year. How can you make sure every stakeholder is informed and, like Michelle said, bought into the rationale so that they can be successful? So if you, next slide for me, and then in your handout, you will really see a template for this. So there's a template in the handout that you guys are going to be able to use during your group work time or individual work time. And in that handout, it has boxes for these key things. So who's planning the acceleration planning team meetings, who's assembling and managing advisory committee, who's managing the work plan. So it has some of those nitty-gritty details laid out. And what I want you guys to do during this time is think about who's going to be responsible for that, accountable. Who should you consult with? That list can keep growing. If you notice here, we're looking at determining the most critical prerequisite skills for ELA. And so that might be the ELA curriculum lead doing the work and the director of curriculum holding them accountable. But there's a lot of people to consult around English language learners, special education, different experts and mentors at different schools and campuses. And then who needs to be informed? And if this is the area that 66% of us want to focus, I'd love for your group time to really hone in here and spend the most time thinking about informing both who needs to be informed and what that might look like or sound like. So we're going to give you 20 minutes to engage as a team or independently on divvying up these roles and responsibilities. You may not get all the way finished, but ensure at a minimum you articulate these key pieces around responsibility, accountability, consulted, and informed. If you're alone from your district, think about how you can bring this back to your team. And if you have a team here, we hope you will join a breakout room. Chris, Shireen, and I will travel around and try to support. And if you need help with the breakout room, chat Shireen. She will be our breakout room pro to make sure this work time is applicable and really effective for all of you. Any questions before we head into our breakout rooms? Chris, anything to add?
Nothing to add? Nope.
All right, awesome. So Shireen will open those breakout rooms. You can head on in, and we are available here for support throughout this process. Great, a lot of great questions about how to support smaller schools, smaller school districts who have a lot on their plates already, how not to add something new. More thinking about this inform, who do we need to inform, who do we need to influence, how can we get this knowledge that we've learned about accelerated learning out?
And I would jump in here just to say, if you are a smaller district, particularly thinking about the rest of this school year, think about one thing you can do. Maybe it's even asking, how do we know where students are at right now? Maybe it's asking a few teachers, what assignments or materials are you able to use in your classrooms, and does that differ from years past? And I would just focus on maybe one thing that you can focus on, especially if you're the only person on the planning committee. You are the planning committee. Everyone has a lot on their plates. Think about what you can do now, and then certainly I would say once you are able to plan a little bit more ahead, maybe this summer into the fall, think now about how you can set that up to provide information around learning acceleration to teachers and school leaders in the summer, and start to plan that. But definitely recognize that can be challenging, or maybe through your ESU or collaboration with some surrounding schools or districts, you might be able to tackle a little bit more regionally as well.
Seeing a lot of great commitments. A lot of folks committing to Zern and planning and implementing that program. We're super excited. So as we wrap up our final slides here, I want to talk a little bit about next steps. We have another session on Monday to plan our approach to diagnosing student learning, to figure out exactly where that unfinished learning is, how to pinpoint it, and then plan to accelerate learning. That session will take place on Monday, so just a plug to join that session if you are interested in more about diagnostics and assessments. We have just the session for you on Monday. And then collaborate with your acceleration planning team on this Zoom, or take this content back to your Zoom team or your school team, so that we can all sort of grow together. In one of the breakout rooms, folks were talking about how they might have a smaller team that they're trying to support, a smaller school, and taking some of these PDs and using that as turnkey PD is a great opportunity for you to develop expertise on your smaller teams. Chris, any closeout announcements from you?
I would just add to that, in addition to this, we linked Nebraska's Renewal and Acceleration Framework. We linked TNTP's Learning Acceleration Guide, which is also in the invite. Those are great tools as well, even before PD, to have teachers or school leaders engage with, and maybe just have a conversation either in PD, PLCs, as a school, about what that potentially looks like or what some of the implications are for. So that's the only other thing I would add to that. And then, here's my email address. Certainly, if you need to get in touch with any of us, feel free to reach out. We're really glad to see you on today's session and look forward to seeing you in future sessions and working with you and your districts and your schools in the weeks and months ahead. So thank you. With that, we'll end today's session. Thank you all, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Aw. Awesome. Thank you, Carrie.